Nessa summoned her new employee to her office, the one she had hired 3 weeks ago. The young woman was a tall brunette with brown eyes and a striking figure. She glanced questioningly at her boss and timidly asked, "Did you call for me, Mrs. Sanders?" "Yes, Isabel, come in. I need to have a serious talk with you. Please, take a seat. I understand that you're currently facing financial difficulties. You're the sole breadwinner for your family, with a disabled mother and a 3-year-old child with autism." "That's correct," Isabel sighed, looking at her boss with confusion. "I have a proposal that could solve all your financial problems. But let me warn you up front, it's an unconventional business proposition. It might shock you at first, but if you're smart, you'll come out ahead. And let me be clear, this conversation must stay between us. If it doesn't, it won't end well for you or your family. I don't make empty threats. Do you understand?" I think I do," Isabel stammered, unsure where this was going. "In short, I want you to seduce my husband." "What? Excuse me?" Isabel's shock was evident as she stared at Nessa in disbelief. "Are you serious?" "Isabel, I'm completely serious. I need to know how my husband really feels about me, whether he loves me or is just staying for the money. Your job is to attract his attention, charm him, and see if you can lure him into bed. Don't actually sleep with him, of course, but I want to test him." "I honestly don't know what to say," Isabel admitted, utterly baffled. "Your words have left me speechless. Are you joking or being serious?" "Do I look like someone who jokes?" Nessa replied dryly with a humorless smirk. "I'm completely serious." I thought she looked silly. "But why me? There are plenty of beautiful young women in our office." "Yes, there are, but unlike the others, you're obedient, responsible, and you need money to support your family. So, are you willing to help me? Frankly, you don't have a choice. If you refuse, I'll fire you, and you'll lose your job. And you need this job, don't you? To buy expensive medication for your mother and pay for your son's specialized preschool and therapy sessions?" "Tell me if I'm wrong." "You're not wrong," Isabel admitted. "So, I have no choice. I can't afford to lose this job. I don't need more problems in my life. I guess I'll have to agree even though I don't want to." "Fine, Mrs. Sanders. I'll do it." "Excellent. I'll send you a photo of my husband and let you know where and when to start this little game. Remember one thing. Don't even think about crossing me. If you act behind my back, you'll regret it. I need to be aware of every step you take. Don't do anything without my approval." "I understand. Don't worry," Isabel replied. "Good. You can go now." Isabel returned to her department, still reeling from her boss's outrageous proposal. She hadn't expected anything like this. The idea of seducing someone else's husband seemed utterly insane. She couldn't comprehend what had driven Mrs. Sanders to this, nor did she expect to ever find out. But Nessa knew Isabel's vulnerable situation all too well. Isabel bore the weight of her entire family alone, supporting her sick mother and raising her autistic child. Landing a job at a successful company had been a hard-won victory. Soon, Nessa sent Isabel the address of a restaurant where her husband Roland dined every evening. Isabel's task was to get his attention. She dressed in an emerald green, form-fitting knee-length dress, styled her hair, applied makeup, and headed to the restaurant. Nessa had reserved a table for her and Roland. Isabel recognized him immediately. A handsome, tall, athletic man in his 30s, dressed in an elegant suit. She couldn't help but admire him. Pretending to stumble, she theatrically fell near his table, clutching her leg in mock pain. "Let me help you up." Roland quickly stood and offered her his hand. "I think I twisted my ankle," Isabel said plaintively. "I'll call a taxi and head home." "No need to call a taxi. You should have that ankle looked at by a specialist. I'll drive you to the hospital. It's just a half-hour away. I wouldn't want to trouble you, Isabel said hesitantly, sniffling softly. I'll just call a taxi. It's probably just a bruise. But Roland insisted. He helped her out of the restaurant and into his car. When Isabel refused to go to the hospital, he drove her home instead, escorting her to her apartment door. I don't know how to thank you for your help, Isabel said. You've spent so much time on me. Don't mention it, Roland replied, smiling as he studied her intently. I hope you recover quickly. It's a shame you declined to see a doctor, but I still recommend getting your ankle checked out. Inside her apartment, Isabel immediately texted Nessa, reporting everything that had happened. She hoped this would mark the end of the ordeal, but Mrs. Sanders thought otherwise. If it don't hurt Izzy, she thought, she wouldn't sleep for a month. A few days will continue, Nessa declared, much to Isabel's dismay. This isn't enough. I need to put my husband in a real position of temptation. To Isabel, her boss seemed like an incredibly strange woman. She still couldn't understand how anyone in their right mind could deliberately provoke their spouse into infidelity. Isabel felt that nothing good would come of this. Surely Mrs. Sanders would regret starting this bizarre scheme. I dare say she was violent, Mrs. Sanders said. A week later, Mrs. Sanders instructed Isabel to jog in the park where Roland ran every morning. Isabel reluctantly agreed. She had no other option. Early the next morning, dressed in a bright blue tracksuit, she headed to the park near her home. 10 minutes later, she spotted Roland. He recognized her immediately and greeted her warmly. Good morning, Isabel. I'm glad to see you jogging in the park. So, no problems with your leg anymore? Roland said, eyeing her with curiosity. Yes, I'm finally back to my normal routine. Someone recommended a great ointment that worked wonders. I'm surprised you remembered me. How could I forget such a charming woman? Hey, since you jog too, why don't we run together in the mornings? It's boring to go alone. Honestly, I wouldn't mind, Isabel replied. Isabel and Roland began meeting in the park every morning. They spent more time walking leisurely and talking than jogging, but Isabel didn't mind. From an outsider's perspective, the man and woman looked like a couple. One day, during one of their park meetings, Roland invited her to a cafe near the park. I'm a passionate coffee lover, he said enthusiastically. Nowhere in the city do they make coffee as delicious as in this small but very cozy place. Isabel, if you're not in a rush, perhaps we could sit there and enjoy a wonderful coffee together. I'm a big coffee fan too, Isabel lied. The next hour and a half passed in the cafe. Soft, relaxing music played in the background, and the atmosphere was warm and inviting. Isabel let her guard down, feeling unusually at ease and comfortable in Roland's presence. She listened intently to him, his soothing voice captivating her. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, bringing her back to reality. The caller ID displayed the name of her boss and Roland's lawful wife. Seeing the name, Isabel instantly tensed. The smile vanished from her lips, and her expression turned serious and thoughtful. What's wrong, Isabel? Roland asked with concern. Who called? Was it work? I have to go, Isabel replied, flustered. I'm sorry it's so abrupt. Let's meet at the park tomorrow, as usual. My essay. I'm not sure if I can make it tomorrow. I have some important matters to attend to, Roland said hesitantly. I'll wait for you regardless. I can't imagine jogging without you, he said with hope in his voice. Give me your number, Isabel. She quickly said goodbye, left her number, and departed, silently cursing herself for letting her guard down. Back at the office, Isabel immediately went to her boss to have a serious conversation. She intended to put an end to this game. Roland was an intriguing and kind-hearted man, and Isabel didn't want to deceive him any further. She realized she was beginning to like him. It's good you came, Mrs. Saunders said calmly, her voice firm. I was planning to talk to you anyway. Sit down. Isabel obediently took a seat, her face set, and asked, How's our project progressing? Isabel. Mrs. Saunders, please, let's end this, Isabel pleaded. Why? The woman asked, surprised. What has my husband done to scare you so much? We've only just begun. But it's wrong to deceive someone and play with their feelings, Isabel dared to argue. A lot of things in this world are wrong, my dear. Don't let that trouble you so much. The only thing that should concern you is the amount of money I promised you. In fact, the rules of the game have slightly changed. Now I need a photo of you two in bed. Or better yet, a video. What? Isabel gasped, unable to believe her ears. Are you serious right now? Absoluteness, Mrs. Saunders replied gravely. Let me explain. This conversation stays between us and my husband's grandfather, Mr. Gray. Mrs. Saunders began recounting her story. When she married Roland, the family business was on the brink of bankruptcy. She convinced Mr. Gray to let her manage it and managed to turn it around. However, the company was still officially in Mr. Gray's name. Recently, he was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and the prognosis was grim. Years ago, Mr. Gray laid out strict rules for Roland. No acting school, regular donations to a charity fund, and loyalty to his wife. If any of these rules were broken, the inheritance, including the company, would go to Mrs. Saunders instead of Roland. For a decade, Roland complied. But Mrs. Saunders was adamant that the company should belong to her. It had thrived because of her efforts. She saw this as her only way to secure what she believed she deserved. Isabel, you're my best hope, Mrs. Saunders said. You've gotten closer to Roland than anyone else I've hired. He's interested in you. This could save the company and everyone who depends on it. Days later, Isabel and Roland met again at their favourite cafe. Roland's intense gaze didn't leave her. I want to know you better, he said softly, his hand brushing hers. Being with you feels different, special. I want to spend more time with you. Oh, Isabel hesitated, unsure whether to keep deceiving him or confess the truth, knowing it could cost her job. Is there something you're not telling me? She asked, her voice trembling. I'm completely sincere with you, Roland replied. What I feel for you is new and overwhelming. As he leaned in and kissed her, Isabel felt her resolve weaken. Their encounters grew more frequent, more intimate, but Isabel struggled with the weight of her secret. Mrs. Saunders continued pressuring her, reminding her of their goal, while Isabel found herself trapped between loyalty and her growing feelings for Roland. How much longer are you going to stall on the intimacy? Mrs. Saunders demanded indignantly, calling her into the office. I'm giving you 1 more week. The old man's condition worsens every day. Hurry up with the photos. All right, I understand. Your husband invited me to a lakeside resort for the weekend. You'll have what you want by Monday. I give you my word. I give you my word. Fine, we'll wait until Monday. Don't disappoint me. On Saturday morning, Roland drove Isabel to a resort by the lake. Isabel was thrilled when she saw the sparkling water and wild ducks gracefully gliding across the lake. She kicked off her sneakers, letting her feet feel the cool earth. Breathing deeply, she felt invigorated by the fresh air. Roland and Isabel swam in the lake, sat on the shore watching the lilac sunset, and stayed together every moment. After dinner outdoors, they returned to their small mirrored cabin. Roland lit candles and they danced to romantic music. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close, and began kissing her neck and shoulders. Standing with excitement, he held her gently, and Isabel melted in his tender embrace. She lost control and allowed him to undress her. But once in bed, Isabel realized she couldn't go through with it. She couldn't build a relationship based on lies. They were both deceiving each other. Roland hiding his marriage, and Isabel her ulterior motives. They were two of a kind. She knew she would lose all self-respect if she did what Mrs. Sanders demanded. Money obtained this way would bring her no happiness. Isabel abruptly pulled away, jumped out of bed, and began dressing. Roland was completely confused. Isabel, what's wrong? What's happening? Did I offend you? Was I too rough? Oh, you weren't rough. I just realized we're making a mistake. A mistake? He asked, bewildered. What mistake? We love each other, don't we? She said. If you didn't feel anything for me, you wouldn't have come here with me. But I know you have a wife. You know. How? Have you known all along, since our first meeting? Yes, I knew. Why? Why didn't you tell me? Why am I just a toy for you to play with and discard before returning to your wife? You kept silent all this time. If I hadn't said anything, you'd have continued the charade. Oh, it wasn't that easy, is it? Cried Derek. Poor Isabel, Roland exclaimed, grabbing her hand. Yes, I'm married, but my marriage means nothing to me. Let go of me. All men say the same, don't they? That they don't love their wives, that they sleep in separate rooms. Relationships built on lies can't last. I need to tell you something about your wife. I actually work for your family company, and your wife. At that moment, Roland's phone rang unexpectedly. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and spoke seriously. Sorry, I mean to take this, it's important. He spoke for a minute, while Isabel stood by the window, deep in thought. When he returned, his face was pale and distraught. Isabel, I have to go back to the city immediately. I just received word that my grandfather has passed away. What? Passed away? Isabel stammered. Perhaps. Yes. I'll drive you back to the city. He sighed, while Isabel realized that Mrs. Sanders' plan had failed. She hadn't managed to become the company's official owner. The old man died still owning it, which meant it would likely pass to his grandson, unless a will specified otherwise. Isabel resolved to stay out of the family's affairs. Despite her feelings for Roland, she knew a married man could bring her nothing but trouble. Returning to work, Isabel couldn't stop worrying about losing her job. How would she support her family without it? Mrs. Sanders' furious scream interrupted her thoughts. Bella called. Jaw hung around here. No one answered. Short and lanky and downcast, she came in thinking it was Winnie. You're fired. Pack your things and get out. Just soothed Bella. Knowing she couldn't help her sick mother and child without her job, Isabel pleaded. Mrs. Sanders, please don't fire me. You failed to do what was required. Because of you, I lost everything I worked years to build. When I came to this company, it was on the brink of bankruptcy. I saved it, and now I'm out. My husband can't manage it. It's all because of you. You couldn't seduce him in time or provide the photos. The old man passed away. I warned you this might happen. Not your place to judge me, Mrs. Sanders, but what you asked me to do was cruel and unfair. To your husband and to me. You tried to force me into bed with him and blackmailed me, knowing my difficult circumstances. Now you want to take away my only source of income. How will I support my family? I didn't ask for your opinion, the enraged woman hissed, stepping closer and glaring at Isabel. I don't care what you do next. Get out. You're useless to me now. What good are you anymore? Leaving? I'm not leaving, Isabel said firmly, shocking Mrs. Sanders. What? She stammered, taken aback. Not leaving? Who do you think you are? I'll fire you and have security throw you out. Thank you, Bella. You can't do that. Your husband's grandfather is gone, which means you're no longer in charge of this company, and you were never officially in charge. You have no right. Wow, look at you talk. You're mistaken, darling. I do have that authority. If you fire me, I'll tell your husband how you tried to trick him out of his grandfather's company. I don't care. Tell him I'm not planning to stay with Roland. I don't need him, but I won't give him this company. I'll fight him in court until I win. Nessa didn't argue long with her subordinate. She fired Isabel and ordered security to escort her out of the office. Isabel found herself out on the street, overwhelmed with despair. What was she to do now? Where could she find a job? She had lost a good salary and the chance to climb the career ladder. It turned out that Roland's late grandfather had made a will before his death. All his property and money went to Roland, but the company was left to his grandson's wife. The old man had recognized Nessa's years of dedicated and selfless work for the company. Roland wasn't surprised by his grandfather's decision. Mr. Gray had truly loved and trusted Nessa. They both knew that Nessa had to hear, and then it came across the news that Nessa had murdered her. Roland had never wanted to run the business or continue his grandfather's legacy. That had always been his wife's dream, as she thrived in that world. Unlike Roland, Nessa was shocked by the decision. She hadn't expected the elderly man to make such a significant choice and leave her the company. In truth, Mr. Gray was a wise man who understood that Roland wouldn't be able to manage the company and might ruin it or sell it off. However, he stipulated in the will that Nessa must pay Roland a fixed sum every quarter. She was satisfied with these terms and readily agreed. When the couple was alone, Roland said, "Nessa, let's get a divorce. I don't love you. I don't think I ever did. My grandfather introduced us, and I always tried to please him. For his sake, I gave up my dream of becoming an actor. I've lived my whole life trying to meet his expectations, but now he's gone. I want to live for myself and be with someone I truly love. We're better off going our separate ways. I wish you happiness with someone else. You deserve it. I'm just glad we don't have to fight over the company." "I agree. It's better if we divorce. We're strangers to each other, living in separate worlds. We're completely different. I'll keep paying you your quarterly allowance. I promise. You won't have to worry about money, especially with your inheritance from your grandfather." Shortly after, Roland and Nessa filed for divorce. Nessa made no claims on Roland's inheritance or property since she had everything she wanted. She didn't need money, had her own home, and knew she'd be fine. Roland, however, couldn't stop thinking about Isabel. He realized he truly loved her and tried calling her, but it was futile. She had changed her number, determined to leave the past behind and start fresh, no matter how difficult it was. Roland eventually tracked her down, knowing where she lived. Isabel was returning home with her son when she saw him standing by the building. Her heart fluttered. Roland rushed to her and embraced her tightly. "Isabel," he said, "forgive me for everything, for hiding the fact that I was married. I love you so much. I can't live without you." Isabel knew Roland had divorced Nessa and that the company had been left to his ex-wife. She also knew how much she missed Roland, his presence, his voice. Since their separation, she had felt drained of inspiration and energy. She wanted to be with him, to love him freely. But first, she needed to confess something important. Starting a new relationship with a lie wasn't an option. She feared Roland might not forgive her and was prepared for that possibility. Nevertheless, she had to tell the truth. "Roland, there's something I need to tell you," Isabel began timidly, stepping back. "I feel the same way you do. I love you deeply. It was unbearable being apart from you. But there's something you need to know." She told him everything, the truth about Nessa's scheme to take over the company and how she had been involved. Roland was stunned. He stared at Isabel, unable to speak. "Yes, what I did was wrong. even despicable. I'm so sorry, Roland. I only agreed because I was desperate. My mother is wheelchair-bound. My son has autism. He doesn't speak, respond to his name, or understand what's said to him. I'm all they have. There's no one else to support us. Who would care for them if not me? Fear of losing my job drove me to agree. I wanted to tell you the truth. The day you learned about your grandfather's death, I was about to confess everything, but you were so devastated that I couldn't. Please forgive me, Roland.
Well,
I need time to process this, Roland said, stepping back. You didn't tell me sooner and now I feel betrayed. I'm sorry. I need to go. Roland walked away, leaving Isabel sobbing uncontrollably, which frightened her son. Roland spent days wrestling with his emotions. He was still shaken by Isabel's confession and Nessa's actions. Money and power had never been his goals. Often, he felt out of place in his family. All he had ever wanted was the freedom to create and perform on stage. His grandfather's company had never been his dream. He would have given it to Nessa without a fight if she had only asked. Ultimately, Roland couldn't stay angry at Isabel. He forgave her because she had the courage to tell him the truth, albeit late. As the saying goes, better late than never, Ro laughed. Roland and Isabel began dating again and married a few months later. Encouraged by Isabel, Roland pursued his dream and enrolled in a drama university. Isabel started her own small business with Roland's financial support, which proved invaluable. Under her diligent leadership, the business gradually grew. Years later, it became highly profitable, and Isabel achieved her goal of building a business empire akin to Nessa. Roland and Isabel welcomed a son, Samuel, named after Roland's grandfather. Their marriage was happy, and they never regretted giving each other a second chance.